Welcome, you guys, to another week. This is very exciting because we are closing out Harry Potter this week. Lots of good videos, and there's a lot of stuff that I really am looking forward to discussing with you in order to kind of get through some of the symbolism that's used here. Also, some of the deeper meaning, even as simple as etymology. So, we're actually going to start there because by this point, we've been introduced to all the characters. You know how they've been characterized, you know their temperaments. And so I think that this is a good week to look at etymology for the characters that we've met in this first installation. So we're going to start with Vernon Dursley and Petunia Dursley. And the Dursleys, I just love their name because it just sounds so dreary and just boring. And so the name Dursley actually comes from a town in Gloucestershire, England. J.K. Rowling said that she chose the name because it sounded very dull and foreboding. Okay, so I think that she made a good choice here. Petunia Dursley, Vernon's wife. So J.K. Rowling said that it was a name that she and her sister used during play pretend games for unpleasant female characters, which I thought was just awesome. I love it when we can draw from our childhood and include those things in our books. So I thought that that was fantastic. So Petunia, to her and her sister as kids, just sounded like an unpleasant person. Now, the symbolism of the flower itself, there's a little bit more deeper meaning here. It involves anger and resentment. So I think that that really suits Petunia quite well. Now remember that we do learn a few things about Petunia, right? In previous chapters, we learn that she kind of disowns her sister. She resents her sister, but it's not for the things that we thought it would be about, right? It wasn't because her sister was, it wasn't because her sister was so disapproving of her, but it was because her sister got so much approval from her parents and impressed her parents. They were so proud of her for being a witch. And Petunia was born Muggle, and she just could not compare to that, right? And so she couldn't live up to that. So we get a strong theme of sibling rivalry in here, which really gives us, and I'm a little bit ahead of myself here with the fairy tale moments because that's coming later, but that does give us a fairy tale moment of Cinderella, right? Of sibling rivalry. And so that's how it's really fitting here because that's exactly how Harry is treated in the Dursleys' household. So the other thing about Petunia's name, it should be noted that the flower itself that she's named for is very small and it's very unassuming in nature and in stature. So that means that they're like these short little, stubby flowers that seem, kind of harmless. And so when I think of Petunia, I just think of her as this character that's like this scrawny, skinny, prim, proper, nose in the air character with a craning neck, as J.K. Rowling describes her, to show that she's very nosy, right? To spy on her neighbors. And now Harry. So Harry is of old German origin, the name itself, and the meaning of Harry is actually home leader or ruler of the house. And that's perfect for Harry because he is the ruler of the house that he becomes a part of, and he actually has the privilege of choosing his house, which most students don't. Now, the English version of this name is Henry, right? And so that's why I included this here in the heading, Henry Harry Potter. And because Harry is used as a nickname of Harry is used as a nickname of Henry or Harold. And J.K. Rowling actually tells us that she got the name Potter, his last name, from people who lived down the road from her. And she liked that surname, so she took it and used it in this book. The next character we have, so the next two characters are other heroes in the series, and we've got Minerva McGonagall and Albus Dumbledore. So Minerva was the Roman goddess of wisdom. You may not be as familiar with Minerva. You may be more familiar with Athena, which was Minerva's counterpart in the Greek gods. So Roman gods and Greek gods are the same entities, but they go by different names. So in Greek, it's Athena, and you've probably heard of Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom. So that's who Minerva is in the Roman catalog of gods. So Minerva is the Roman goddess of wisdom, and her last name, McGonagall, in the book, comes from the Celtic conigal meaning the bravest. So this really suits Minerva's character, and I love that J.K. Rowling has really strongly characterized these characters through just their names alone and all the implications that come with them. So Minerva, or Athena, is primarily associated with the strategy of war as opposed to the act of war. Now, this is very suitable to her role because remember, she is the female counterpart to Albus Dumbledore. And so it's the two of them together who decide to hide Harry at the Dursleys' residence. This is important because Minerva is a part of the strategy, but she's not actually a part of the war, right? But she does help with the strategic placing of Harry so that he can grow up to the point where he's ready to learn magic and to assume his role as the hero and, of course, the ruler of the house. And then Albus Dumbledore. So Albus is actually Latin for white. Especially if you think of the flat white of stones or clothing. And then Albion is an ancient and poetical name from Britain. It comes from the same root. So we have a few different implications here with Albus. We can also think of Percival, a knight of King Arthur's Round Table who was granted a glimpse of the Holy Grail. So Albus shares this name with his father. And also Percy Weasley. So this is important. The person who was able to get a glimpse of the Holy Grail. So remember, even though the Holy Grail is a thing, Harry is like the Holy Grail in this story. He's the one that will save everyone in the end. Dumbledore, his last name, is actually an 18th century word for bumblebee, which I thought was pretty cool. And Rowling says that she wanted to associate his name with bees because she imagines him kind of just wandering around the castle, humming to himself. But there's another interesting application of the word Dumbledore, another potential important meaning of this comes from Christopher Woosley, who ends up writing, although not widely known, an alternate meaning for the word Dumbledore is a style of hat that was made semi-popular in London in the 1880s and 1890s. So if you take this meaning into account, Albus Dumbledore's name would have had the meaning white hat, which is kind of perfect because that's a term for the hero in a story or the protagonist of a story. And even though Albus Dumbledore is not that hero in this story, he really is a great champion of our hero, Harry. And so Mrs. Rowling actually did a great job naming her great champion of good white hat. And I just thought that that was awesome about Albus Dumbledore. He's one of my favorite characters. I also think Albus Dumbledore is we kind of need him to be in there. Albus is probably one of the reasons that we're able to appreciate the lessons that we get from this text as adults, because he is the one that kind of spouts these words of wisdom that resonate with us, no matter how old we are. And then we have two characters left from this book, Rubus Hagrid and Sirius Black. So Rubus is actually a homonym for the English word rubeus, from the Latin word ruber for red. And this totally makes sense. This is related to the word ruddy, like a ruddy complexion, which would be like a reddish complexion, which is often the sign of someone who drinks a lot, right? And we know that Hagrid likes his alcohol. So he's kind of, like a person who messes up, and then Albus Dumbledore is just so kind and forgiving, and he knows Hagrid's heart, so he gives him some grace, and he allows him to still work on the grounds and live on the grounds of Hogwarts, although he's no longer allowed to practice magic. So that tells us something about Hagrid's character in the very beginning, that he can be trusted, but he's almost kind of like a weakness. You know, your chain is only as strong as the weakest link. So we know that Hagrid is probably the weakest link amongst all of the professors at Hogwarts. Hagrid's last name is related to several Old English, French, and German words. So hag is actually Old English for hedge rider, comes from hagatess, and also meaning one who straddles the hedge. So this is interesting because I think this fits Hagrid perfectly. That means that the hedge was the boundary between the civilized world and the world beyond. So there's this kind of wildness about Hagrid. There's this part of him that's just very unruly, not only in his appearance, but I think it works really well because it kind of just makes him like this kind of itinerant. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does characterize him as just kind of a little wild, a little unruly. Hagridden is the next term, and this actually means ridden by a hag or a witch, which is kind of perfect for Hogwarts. There is this we call this by another name now, but I can't think of the term. It's a psychological term. But hag-ridden can mean afflicted with nightmare. So this is actually an old term for sleep paralysis. There's another term for this now, but for sleep paralysis. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but this is the sensation of being held immobile while you're in bed, often by a heavy weight, perhaps even a bright light, accompanied by a sense of another presence, could be an alien presence or just some other presence. And so hag-ridden is an old term for that sensation. Haggard, of course, is related to Hagrid, the name, and it gives an appearance of exhaustion. You know, to look haggard is not a good thing. It's medieval French, actually, for wild and unruly. And then lastly, haggard. So haggard is Low German for gaunt or haggard. And it's got this sense of like haunted expression or, you know, careworn. And we know that when we meet Hagrid for the first time, that he's a little scary. He's a little scary looking to us. J.K. Rowling said that Hagrid is also another Old English word, meaning if you were Hagrid, it's a dialect word, meaning that you had a bad night. And since Hagrid's a big drinker, he's had a lot of bad nights. So that would pretty much explain that. And now on to our last name, Sirius Black. So Sirius Black, so Sirius in Greek means burning, and Sirius also means the dog star, which is the brightest one in Canis Major. The Great Dog constellation is what it's called, alluding to the fact that he can change into a big black dog. And so we get those little insinuations here from his name. Now there are other names here, and I've included this paragraph so you can read about it if you're curious, but the idea here is that Sirius Black is going to end up being a good person, a positive character, but also very mysterious, hence the big black dog. And that is etymology and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Stay tuned for the next video where we'll be talking about, oh gosh, a multitude of things. I'm going to mix in some things from the handout as well as book discussion, so stay tuned.